Everybody, to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Tuesday, December 14th of 2021. Thank you for tuning into the stream, everybody, today, whether you're watching me live, of course, or watching this back as a recording. Appreciate all of you. Six is here. Six, I know you emailed in a question here as well, so we'll be getting to that on stream here today. As always, this is open Q&A. Try to answer questions in roughly the order they're coming in. So if you've got questions for me, go ahead and pop them into the YouTube chat or into the Office Hours channel on Slack now. And we'll get to questions in about the order they came in. Have a couple things interesting to talk about here. Some back testing, looking at results of previous slates. Also a question about just kind of reviewing winning lineups and things like that. So we will get to everything here. I see David is here as well. Welcome, David. I want to actually start today's stream, though, doing relatively a basic demo here of how to get your lineups out of SaberSim and into the contests you want to play. If you are already familiar with the process of reserving your entries on DraftKings or FanDuel, if you're playing multi-entry and using the entry editor, this probably won't be very useful for you, but especially for people that are maybe, just getting into DFS, playing contests for the first time, maybe not even super familiar with that whole process. I just want to show at a baseline the most basic way to build lineups on SaberSim and get them entered into your contests. So I'm going to do that real quickly here for both DraftKings and FanDuel for tonight's NBA slate, just so we kind of have a record of that so we can use this as a reference point. But let's go ahead and jump into that. So again, this is going to be more of a strategy. This is going to be better for somebody that's maybe just playing a few lineups or at the very least just entering one contest. So let's say, for example, we want to play 3 lineups on DraftKings for NBA tonight. So we'll go ahead and start here. We'll assume we're playing a 3 max, 1,000 to 10,000 or so entrants. Leave the settings here pretty default here. Not going to make too many changes. And we'll just go ahead and start building our lineups. Build these pretty quick. The NBA builder is just so fast, which is amazing when you are right up against lock and need to get this done quickly. We do have to make 2 changes to abide by the DraftKings rules. So maybe what we'll do for this here is let's just go ahead and say that we want to hit lock on Chris Boucher and we don't want to play Julius Randle. I'm just making it up, but let's say those are our 2 things we want to do. And then what we can do is we can go ahead and click save. And then we're just going to download the lineups. Again, I'm not using the entry editor here. I'll show you the entry editor after this to just show you how much more easy it is. But in this case, we can just download these lineups. So that download is going to get downloaded to my computer. It just downloaded here. And then let's hop over to DraftKings. And we'll go ahead and enter these in here. So if you just want to get your lineups up onto DraftKings, right? Again, easy thing to do here is to just go to the lineups tab up at the top and click upload lineups. This is going to take us to the lineup upload page on DraftKings, and we can click upload CSV. And I'm just going to upload the lineup CSV that I just recently just downloaded off of SaberSim. So we're all set here. It's picking up the 3 lineups. So we're good there. And now we can go to the lobby. And let's find a contest. So we'll go ahead. I built 3 lineups, so let's go find a 3 max here. Something low dollar, classic. There's normally the hot shot. We'll do the hot shot. Pretty good contest overall. So we'll go ahead and click enter here. And it's just going to go ahead and just pick up all the lineups, right? The 3 lineups we entered, they're already here. We can click this to enter them selectively if we just want to do 1 or 2 or whatever. Easy thing to do here is to just say enter for $9. We're going to enter all 3. So now we can click this. Are you sure? Yep, we're sure. And we're good. So pretty straightforward. Again, this is going to be easiest if you're just trying to play one contest, get your lineups out of SaberSim and quickly onto the site. So we're in. So that's entered now for DraftKings. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for FanDuel. It's slightly different. If you're not familiar with FanDuel or you're used to playing on DraftKings or something like that, can be a little bit different here. So we'll go ahead. Let's go back to FanDuel, or let's go to FanDuel in the app. And okay, so here's FanDuel. We're going to do the same thing here. We'll do, again, let's do a 3 max, 1,000 to 10,000 entrants. We'll just build our 3 lineups. Builds pretty quickly here, building our full pool of 500. Cool. So we've got our lineups for FanDuel here. We're good to go. We'll go ahead again and just click this download button. It's going to download a CSV right to my computer. You can see that up here. And now let's go over to FanDuel. So FanDuel's a little bit different if you're doing it this way. Instead of uploading the lineups first and then picking the contest that you want to apply them to. In this case, you just go find the contest and upload them directly to the contest. So we'll go ahead here, let FanDuel load. And we'll go to NBA. And a good contest for this one will be the SWAT, the $1 3 max. So we're good to go here. And we'll go ahead and just click this. It's going to take us to the page where we typically build our lineups if you were entering by hand. But since we have the CSV here, we can just scroll all the way down. There's this upload lineups from CSV button. We can click browse, find the file that we just downloaded from SaberSim and click upload. And it's going to pick up the same thing. 3 lineups detected. You need to pay $3 in entry fees to do this. I'm going to do that. Click enter 3 lineups. Congratulations. We are entered in 3 of 3 lineups. We can click view my lineups and we will see them here in the upcoming tab. Now, that is at the baseline, I think, the most basic way to enter into a contest. Now, if you were playing a lot of different contests, right? Or if you just had a lot of entries total, it can be pretty tedious to do this. So we created the entry editor basically to streamline this entire process. So I'm going to quickly do a quick entry editor demo of how much easier this is using the entry editor. But we have a lot of other tutorials on our site and in the app and things like that that you can check out if you're still running into issues here. But just to show you how much easier this is with the entry editor, a good example of this is, let's say something were to change, right? NBA is crazy. A lot of players getting ruled out all the time. It's likely that we're going to have to update our lineups at least some point before lock. So let's say we want to do a rebuild, right? We're gonna update something. Maybe James Harden gets ruled out, just for example, so he's removed from the pool, and we're rebuilding our lineups here in this case. So let's go ahead and do a new build on the FanDuel side. We'll do this quickly as a quick demo on the entry editor for both sites here. Okay, so we have our new lineups. Just so it's not confusing, I'm going to actually rename this here. You can rename up here, which can be helpful. We'll say FanDuel Final. Let's say this was maybe our final set of lineups before lock. In this case, if we want to use the entry editor to just quickly update all the entries for the contest that we're now registered for, we can click the entries. We can click this download template file from FanDuel, which is going to take you right to the right page on FanDuel to download this file. What you want to do is click the CSV edit button next to any lineup that corresponds to the slate you're playing. So this is the NBA 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time main slate. We click CSV edit. We click download a CSV template here. That's, again, going to just immediately download that entries file to our computer. We go back to SaberSim. In this case, we can actually just drag and drop the file or upload it using the upload tool, both of which are pretty easy here. And then this is the entry editor. This is our tool of editing your files, your entries files, so you don't have to get your hands dirty in the CSVs or anything like that. And what we can do then is go ahead and click Fill Contest with Lineups. Since we named this, we can clearly identify that it's different than the other builds. So this is the FanDuel Final. And in this case, I want a unique, actually, it doesn't matter if we use rank or unique fill because both of these are going to be the same for a single contest. So we'll just apply them here. You can see it now is picking up that the lineups in this contest are the FanDuel Final lineups we just built. And we can download all entries, click download, saves to my computer, and we go back to FanDuel and just upload this file here. Edit entries, and we're good. So quite a bit faster to use the entry editor if you're familiar with it. But of course, if you're just trying to get some lineups in for the first time, maybe a little unfamiliar, not playing a ton of different contests, not playing a ton of entries, you can just use the upload lineups from CSV directly on FanDuel to get them in. But let's quickly do this on DraftKings as well, using the entry editor. So again, we're already entered. We've done our lineups. We've gotten into contests, but news has now changed and we need to rebuild some lineups. So we'll do the same thing here. In this case, we can just click download template file from DraftKings, and DraftKings just makes it so it automatically will start downloading or prompt you to start downloading the file. So we can grab the DraftKings one and load it in here. And we see our hot shot, right? It's picking up the exposures that we have in the lineups that are currently in there, but we need to make a change. We need to update something because news has changed. So let's go ahead and start a new build here. And let's go ahead again and make a change here so that we're abiding by DraftKings community guidelines. Let's lock Damon this time. We'll go ahead and hit save. And let's go ahead and call this DK final. Oops, so that we can see this easily in the entry editor. Go back to the entry editor and fill. We can fill using the rank fill method. And in this case, I don't have DraftKings already up. So I'm going to click download and open DraftKings. It's going to save the file, take us right back to the right page on DraftKings that we need. One thing to note here is that this is a different page than where we originally uploaded the lineups. So we originally uploaded the lineups on the /lineup/upload page. This is the edit entries page. It's different. This is the page you use when you're already entered into contests. So we'll go ahead and click upload CSV and click the file there. So again, just kind of a very basic way here of entering your contest, especially if you're just playing a single contest or maybe just loading lineups for the very first time. That is the most basic way to do it. And then a quick demo of how the entry editor makes that a lot easier to edit, provided that you're already entered. If you guys are familiar with playing lots of entries, multi-entering, the process of reserving entries and things like that, I imagine this wasn't super helpful for you. Maybe you already know this, but if you're new to DFS or new to multi-entry or new to SaberSim even, hopefully that was kind of a very quick little helpful demo. And if you're ever running into trouble, always feel free to email us at support@sabersim.com or reach out in Slack. So anyway, good quick little demo there to walk through. Let's go ahead and start getting into some questions. I'm going to hit this one first because I think this is kind of a quick little question. This is from Denny. He said, sorry, new to this, maybe a dumb question. There are no dumb questions for office hours. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you guys have. He said, how do you edit projections on the homepage? So the easiest thing to do is to just go in here and just type in your new projection. So you can go in and update this and you'll get this green indicator if you've raised the projection. If you've lowered it, it'll be red. So we can see, for example, if this column is missing, I think most of the time when I hear this question from users, it's because the column is missing, right? You don't know where to go. The table here is totally customizable. And what probably happened is somehow my projection column got removed. If that happens, click this little table icon here on the far right. This is going to show you all of the columns that you can include in this table. And probably what happened is that my projected column was removed so that it's just not showing up here at all. If that happens, you can just go back in here, scroll to the bottom, make sure it's clicked in, reapply it, and it'll pop back up. So that is the easiest way to edit projections. Let me know if that helps, Denny. All right, I see we have some more viewers here joining the stream. So welcome, everybody. If you've got questions for me, go ahead and just pop them into the queue now. We'll get to everything on stream here today. I'm going to jump over to this question from Steve. This came in yesterday afternoon. And Steve said, I would love to see a review of SaberSim's winners in the Max Challenge. Looking at their lineups to see where they went right may be helpful to me for sure. Maybe even looking at the winner in general and doing the same. So first off, talking about this question kind of generally, I would actually encourage you guys to try to avoid tunneling in your review process on whatever the winning lineup happens to be that particular night or that particular day in the case of NFL. The winning lineup in any given contest, even if it's somebody that is building lineups with SaberSim, may not even be a very good lineup. There's a lot of variance in DFS on any given day. And the best lineup in the contest is not necessarily the one that won, or the highest expected value lineup in the contest is not always necessarily the one that won. If you are interested in reviewing lineups and trying to learn something from it, I think you are better off actually reviewing lineups from players that you know are profitable, good players, and seeing what they do every single slate, not just the ones they won, to get an idea of what their process might look like or what kind of lineup constructions they like to use. Even Cody says here, who is our Bink winner from the winner circle, he said, trust me, my win was not super indicative of my overall exposures either. And yeah, I think that's true. And it doesn't even say a lot necessarily about the strategy. I think one thing that's always funny is you get this every year is inevitably someone's going to win a Millie Maker without stacking at all. And then there's always a lot of probably incorrect discourse going on Twitter and social media and things like that. And in DFS spaces of like, is stacking dead? This guy won $1 million last night without stacking. And that's kind of what I mean. The highest expected value lineup in the contest is often not the one that wins, actually. So with that said, we do want to do more of this kind of thing, bringing people onto office hours, talking about process, talking about, less so what happened with a specific lineup, especially if you built 150 lineups, you might not even be able to say, well, this is what I was thinking for this lineup. But what we do want to do is have more, even people from the SaberSim community coming on and talking about their process, talking about what works for them. So that is something that's on our radar. The NHL strategy session we did a couple weeks ago where we had, it was probably a couple months ago now with Mr. Clean and Couch, seemed to be received pretty well. I think it was cool getting some fresh faces, some fresh voices on the stream. So we definitely want to do some more of that. But even just in general, if you want to look at past results, past slates, I would recommend taking the approach of looking at players that are successful players, and seeing what they do even when they lose. Not necessarily just what the winning lineup or what their best lineup looks like. See what their entire pool of lineups looks like and see what happens even when they lose. So, but good question though, for sure. Okay, cool. So I'm going to quickly jump over to this question. This is one that Six shot us via email, and I think this is somewhat related. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit as well. And this question has come in a slightly different format before, but we'll read the question first. A bit of a long question here. So we'll read this out loud. The question starts with, I want to try to utilize my NFL Showdown results to backtest using SaberSim and see if I can hone my process and give myself a better chance at synthetically creating the winning lineup combination next slate using the Sims. I tried clearing any and all filters and even running the sliders as default for that specific contest, and was still unable to accidentally generate the winning lineup from last night's NFL Showdown for the Millie Maker. I even went in and calculated the total salary the winner used and set that at the max limit before running the Sims, and then even set it to the max and still wasn't generating the optimal captain or lineup combination. I'm not sure if this is a reasonable ask, but curious to hear suggestions, or even if Jordan can recreate the winning combination on stream to help me sharpen the process and put myself in a better position to win in the future. And this question has come up before. I don't think I've answered it specifically for Showdown, but definitely for main slates, right? People come on and say, I was trying to backtest and trying to build the winning lineup from last night using SaberSim, and I can't get there. And the reality is that that's going to be somewhat difficult to do unless you update projections to match very closely to what players actually scored. And even if you were able to do it, you wouldn't really end up with a process that could be repeatable or would be very useful for you beyond just figuring out how to have optimized for last night's NFL Showdown slate, right? The process, the individual steps that you might be taking in the app to recreate a winning lineup is not going to lead you to necessarily a repeatable process that is going to make the optimal lineup for a future slate. For the NFL Showdown last night, right? If in particular there was a player who had an extreme outcome, like a 99th percentile type outcome, you're not going to necessarily get a ton of that player showing up just in the lineups here. And it's unlikely that, where am I? That would have been week 14. It's unlikely that a lineup would even show up. With 1,500 game simulations, which is what you're getting when you build 1,500 lineups here, you're covering a lot of outcomes, but by no means anything close to the actual real number of potential outcomes that a game has. And it's not necessarily always true that the winning lineup is going to be in your pool of 1,500 lineups, no matter what you do. If it were, that would actually probably be an incredibly positive sign for your outlook for that particular slate. You essentially missed it by just the selection process of what lineups ended up in your top 150 or 20 that you actually played. So I know that this maybe is not the most satisfying answer here, but I would try to avoid going back to slates and then trying to figure out how to build the actual optimal for a slate that has already passed, because what you ultimately end up doing is just over optimizing for that slate. It doesn't end up helping you very much in the long term of improving your process. So for Showdown, I think you might be able to find that you can get there a little bit more easily, but with the sim variance being as high as it is, right, using single game simulations to build each lineup, even if you recreated the optimal in one particular build and you had it coming up and figured out some way to do it, you might not necessarily get it on the next build. And it may just be such that you generated the optimal, you pulled the right sim where that optimal lineup could have shown up once, and in the next build, you get a different set of 1,500 sims that doesn't even lead you to that lineup. So I think this is a little bit too also bridging on that kind of results-based approach that can be a little bit dangerous in terms of actually building a sustainable process over time. So, but I think for main slates, classic slates where there are multiple games on the slate, I think this is a completely an exercise in futility, because what it's going to ultimately take to build the winning lineup, the bink lineup or something like that, for an NFL slate is to basically take the actual scores that players scored and load them in as custom projections. You ultimately aren't otherwise going to get there. So before I move on, one other way of kind of visualizing this, right, is if you're building 1,500 lineups, right, your expectation of how many lineups are in that pool, even showing up in the top 1% of lineups in that contest, is only 15, right? Your expectation, just mathematically speaking, your expectation, even if you assume that you have a big edge on the field, your expectation of how many lineups are in your pool of 1,500 that would actually be the mathematical optimal is far, far, far below 1 from a pool of 1,500 lineups almost all of the time. So Six follows this up by saying, so any suggestions for useful homework to become better at using the product? That's a tough question. I guess in the name of, I mean, there's plenty of different ways to add value to SaberSim. A lot of the videos that we have up on YouTube are intended to kind of help bridge that gap. But I would say if you are interested in, after a Monday Night Football slate, going in and trying to get better at NFL Showdown, I think one of the better uses of that time would be going and looking at what, just like I said before, at what players that we know are sharper players did for particular contests. What kind of lineup constructions did they use? What kind of captains did they use? You can do that by just downloading the CSV if you're entered into the contest. A free tool that I like to use quite a bit, RotoGrinders has this results DB tool. And I think this is something that anytime I pull up something that's a competitor here, I like to preface it by saying this is something that we would obviously like to have in our product at some point. But for now, the RotoGrinders results DB, I think, is pretty useful. And you can go in here and click into yesterday's slate and then click the Millie Maker here. And I like to look at what Giant Squid does pretty often. See if he played. Yeah. And you can kind of get an idea of what his lineup constructions look like. You can also go to ownership here and see what his exposures look like, how much salary is being left on the table, what are the lineup constructions, right? Where's his leverage on the field? So Six says results DB is part of my homework, so appreciate the reassurance. I think this is a good idea. Cody said Fantasy Labs has one as well. Yeah, there's a lot of other sites that have something like this. But I think rather than trying to optimize for how could I have gotten the literally the binking lineup in SaberSim, I think your time is going to be better spent here studying what other sharp players did to approach the slate, and they could be wrong too, right? I am almost certain that Giant Squid's 93% captain Sony Michel last night probably didn't work out so good. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was wrong. And this is just one player's approach too. So it's not necessarily the only way to play. But I do think it's a better use of your time trying to optimize for a slate that already took place in the past. Just mathematically speaking, the chance of even building that optimal here is low. It's unlikely, and even if you got it, it would probably just be the variance of that build that allowed you to get there. So, but it's a good question overall. I think the other thing you can do too is, try to judge your lineups from a standpoint of process rather than the results. So go look at your lineups, see how often you were duplicated. I think that can be another good exercise. Go look at the lineups that you built, maybe download the CSV. And if you built 150, go figure out how often was each lineup duplicated. Look at the lineups that were unduplicated and see if you can kind of figure out why. Were they lower salary? Did they use a combination of players that is uncommon by the field? Look at the lineups that got duplicated a lot. Sometimes I'll build lineups that are 48,000 salary and they were duplicated 50 times, right? And it can be an interesting exercise of, I like to use max salary as a way to avoid getting duplicated. But there are also heavily duplicated lineups that are built at 48,000 sometimes, and figuring out why, what combination of players allowed that lineup to be duplicated, and reduce my EV for that particular lineup. And this is all very showdown focused, right? If it was a classic slate, you're looking at how often your lineups were duplicated probably isn't going to be as useful because the lineups are just much less likely to be duplicated in classic at all. This is very showdown focused. But that is, I think it's a good starting point. So yeah, good question though. And it's always important to be thinking about these things. If you can spend some time, even just a little bit of time, carving out a little bit of time to think about the slate that was before moving on to the slate that's in front of you for that night, I think it will help you improve as a player over time. So, cool. Question from Brian here. Let's take a look at this. This just popped in, and this is the last question I have in my queue, at least for the moment. So if you've got other questions for me, feel free to fire them off, but we'll read this one first. Last night for the NFL Showdown slate, I did 420 max, but had Higbee and Edmonds in the pool continuing to show in the pool. So I had to reduce my lineups from 150 to 20, then bump back up to 80 to meet what I needed. Didn't change any other exposures. I assume this was because variance was so high. I was wondering if there was an easier route. I've shared first in 2 of last 3 showdowns in the 25-cent 150 max and almost took down the one on DraftKings last night. SaberSim's been helping a ton with showdowns in the last few weeks since joining it and really enjoy the office hours. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, honestly, what it sounds to me like here, Brian, is that maybe the build you were working with ran prior to the final sim running. Right? If you had run, so let's just say, let me just demo this. So let's say we're playing the slate again from last night and we have this build and this is, 1 p.m., right? If you are in here and later, actually, this is actually a good example of this. This build was in here. This was from yesterday. This was a build I ran yesterday here, demoing this on stream. Let me refresh this to get rid of this. So this is perfect that this build is here because it's showing some of these guys that are now out. Just give me a second here. Okay, so we're like getting Edmonds lineups, right? Even though he's already been rolled out. And we could go in here and, for example, uncheck Edmonds and make sure that these guys aren't out, right? And then you're getting a message here that you need to build more lineups. So maybe you're going through the process of doing this. The best thing I would recommend here is doing one more final build before lock with the final sim that runs 1 hour before kickoff, right? We're clearly running into some trouble here with this old build with the old projections. So once the final sim runs, we get the news that Edmonds and Higbee are out. Let me make sure that that's, yeah. So now Edmonds and Higbee are out. Then I would go in and run one kind of final build here. So maybe in this case, let's go ahead here and do this, right? So we're running one more final build of 20. And at this point, we should get no Edmonds, no Higbee in the entire pool. Now, I know if you've spent some time throughout the day dialing in a build, adjusting exposures, getting your lineups exactly where you want, it can be a little frustrating if you have to go through and run that one final sim prior to lock. Okay, so Brian says it was after the last sim. That's a little strange. I may have to follow up on that. Maybe if you want to just DM me the link to the build in question here, because if you ran it after the final sim, right, like we're seeing here, you shouldn't have had any Edmonds or Higbee in the pool. So maybe DM me a link to that build and we can take a little bit of a closer look here. Because if you ran it after the final sim, they shouldn't have been showing up at all. They're 0 projected. They're out of the pool at that point. So, but I'm glad that SaberSim is working well for you for these showdowns. And I'm sorry that you had the issue with those players showing up there. But that definitely shouldn't have happened. So. Cool. Yeah. So 6 says, any general thoughts or suggestions on things to adjust and manipulate when building sims for NFL Showdown to help reduce duplication with other SaberSim users that might be playing the same contests aside from max salary adjustments? That's a good question. I think, honestly, the bigger fish to fry here is reducing your duplication with everybody else playing the contest, not really so much just the other people using SaberSim. Again, because you're using a single game simulation to generate each individual lineup, there's certainly a chance that you end up duplicating, right? But even in your particular build, let's say you're building 150 lineups, right? To build your entire pool, we pull 1,500 game sims from a bucket of thousands of game sims of the game. And then your ultimate selection of 150 lineups is just a smaller subset of that. So your risk of duplicating a SaberSim user is somewhat low. It is as high. I don't think you are significantly more likely to duplicate a SaberSim user than you are to just be duplicated in the contest, right? You may see some SaberSim logos with your lineup potentially at times, but I think that the bigger question here is reducing duplication in general. And that's a very hard challenge to solve. I'll talk about some things that I like to do. I think that is, especially if you're playing multi-entry, if you're playing the biggest contest, playing the Millie or the Minimax or anything like that for showdowns, that is almost the game. That is almost the game itself, of how can I build lineups that have the highest chance possible of success and the lowest possible chance of being duplicated. So I have mentioned plenty of times before that one of my things that I like to do the most here is to drop this max salary down. But I know you said apart from dropping max salary. So let's do a build here and look at some other things that I like to look at when I'm trying to reduce duplication for Showdown. While this is building, I know I just did a build, so I probably could have used that, but we'll let this one build too. One of the other things that I've been experimenting too with is I think there's a contest selection component to this. I've been experimenting a little bit recently here with NFL Showdown of targeting smaller contests that still match our effective entrance standpoints and playing more single entry, more 3-max and things like that for Showdown, because I think it is a little bit easier to reduce duplication. Not only are there just a lot less lineups in the contest, but you get people dropping their cash lineups in there. You get some ownership condensing just like you do on main slates. And while you're exposed to a little bit higher variance overall, if you're playing $20 of volume, for example, and instead of playing the dime 20 max, the quarter 20 max, and the $1 20 max and getting 60 lineups down, maybe you're only able to get 5 lineups down in single entries. I do think you can reduce your chance of being duplicated a little bit more by taking that approach instead. But apart from that, another thing that I think is an interesting thing to look at is to look for combinations of players that are unlikely to be duplicated together, or possibly are negatively correlated, or just have an ownership product that kind of implies that their chance of being used together implies that their chance of being used together is lower than expectation, right? And some of this kind of takes a little bit of an intuitive sense. I mean, one thing that you can look for is I really like playing lineups where there's two players projected for less than 10% ownership or so in the pool. Last night, it seems like some of the most efficient lineups here showing up at the top were pretty chalky, but you can see a lineup like this, right? I don't know if I necessarily agreed with this ownership projection. That's maybe a different story, but a lineup that in theory like this is set up like this is much less likely to be duplicated than other lineups in the pool, not only because it has a salary of 48,000, it's 2,000 below the max salary, but you have these two players that are sub 10% owned, right? Ownership sum can be a little bit of a trap for showdowns because I don't think it accurately depicts how much less likely a lineup is to be used when you have two players that are much lower owned compared to the rest of the pool, right? These two players combined, in theory, even though Kyler Murray probably had a much higher captain ownership than that, right? Or these two players, right, are much less likely to be used together if this is their actual ownership. So one of the things I like to look for is lineups that not only sacrifice some salary, but also use combinations of players that are mathematically unlikely to be used together, right? The other option here is to actually look for player combinations that are, from a standpoint of correlation, or thinking about what other players are actually likely to do when they're building, or lineups unlikely to be used together. There are a ton of different ways to do that. So we talked yesterday, actually. One example is, actually, we don't have that situation now as much. One example I gave yesterday when Edmonds was still questionable is that I felt lineups that included both James Conner and Chase Edmonds were unlikely to be used. The Packers, when they're on showdown slates, I think are another good example of A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are often unlikely to be used together because those players are negatively correlated. And a lot of people hand building or using traditional optimizers are going to intentionally remove those kinds of lineups from their pool. Other combinations of players that are unlikely to be used are lineups where you have a quarterback captain and the opposing defense, right? And in this case, we have a few lineups like this in our pool. The way I like to use this from a kind of a more practical standpoint is I will look sometimes, especially if I'm really intentionally trying to avoid duplication, and look, what are the most common captains that I'm getting? And what are the players that they are negatively correlated with, right? We don't need to worry so much about negative correlation here. In fact, you can even see it in the sliders, right? The correlation, the way that players are correlated to one another in NFL Showdown comes through enough when you're just using single game sims that you can play things like Kyler Murray captain with Rams defense and know that there's an optimal game sim in our sim database where those players are optimal together and they can be used together in this kind of format. There are many different combinations of these double tight end kinds of lineups, two tight ends playing on the same team. I mentioned QB against opposing defense. You can even do this a little bit from the lineup construction standpoint. So last night's game is probably not the best example because this game had a high total and a relatively close spread here. But one thing I like to do from a lineup construction standpoint is if I'm getting a game, maybe there's a 7.5 point spread, and one team is considered kind of a heavy favorite on that game. One thing that I like to do, and I apologize about this, I don't know why this is showing up. We're getting these double logos here. But one thing I like to do is to kind of flip what I think is going to be the popular construction on its head. And maybe let's assume last night that the most popular construction is going to be more overweight to Arizona. I think they were the favorite. We can go ahead here and limit lineup constructions from our pool of 20 where we're getting more Arizona. And maybe even we remove balance builds and we say we're only going to play lineups where we're using at least 4 Rams players. And I think this can actually be very powerful, in particular when there are slates with big spreads on them, right? You can create these lineup constructions here that are a little bit more unique for the given slate. So success. So is it the best approach to just comb through lineups manually and look for specific combos, or perhaps a basic/advanced rule you have success with in the event it's not just a matter of preference? Yeah, I think that's probably best practice. And I don't even think it needs to necessarily be something that if you're playing 150 lineups, it might be a little bit unrealistic to say that you're going to have time to go through and handpick all 150. But maybe you do. I think one thing that I like to do is, in general, just get a sense of who my most owned captains are, get familiar with what the lineups that are looking like that are coming out of this, and see if I can find combinations of lineups that might be a little bit unique for that particular player. One thing that I like to do too, here's another example, is if I'm going to use a Cooper Kupp captain, I think an unlikely combination of that particular player is to use Cooper Kupp captain, but to not use Stafford in the flex, right? And cherry picking certain lineups where the QB isn't even used, right? This is going to be a very unlikely combination of other players in the contest to choose, and cherry picking some of these lineups into your pool, right? You can see we're not really sacrificing very much Saber score at all to do this, and cherry picking a few of these lineups in can be a good approach. Overall, I think SaberSim's approach to building showdown lineups in general, since we're actually using optimal game sims, setting a max salary that's a little bit lower than the cap, I think those things are going to go very far in reducing your chance to be duplicated at all. And if you're building 150 lineups or even building 20 and you don't have time to do this, I don't think you have to do this. But if you're playing less lineups or you do have the time to do it and you really, really want to dial in on trying to avoid duplication, which I think is a good use of your time, I think it can improve the EV of these lineups quite a bit. I think these are good ways to do it. One is to look at the lineup construction. Ask yourself, what is the field going to think about this game, right? Does the field think this is going to be a low-scoring game? Does the field think this is going to be a high-scoring game? What lineup constructions are likely to come from that? And can I pivot from a lineup construction standpoint? Can I build lineups that are overweight in terms of stack size on the underdog? But also from there, look at the combinations of players that are included. Can I create lineups with player combinations where the ownership product is going to be low? Great. Or can I create combinations of players that, because of literally who the players are in the lineups, are unlikely to be used? There are a lot of people out there that, because they're using traditional optimizers that don't have these game sims and just optimize for average performance, that are going to have to go down and sit when they start building their lineups for the NFL Showdown slate and say, when Cooper Kupp is used, put Matt Stafford in the lineup. When Matt Stafford is the captain, make sure there are 2+ Rams pass catchers. Don't use QB captain with the opposing defense. Don't use 2 running backs from the same team. Don't use 2 tight ends from the same team, because on a traditional tool that is optimizing for average projection, those players are only going to get thrown into the lineup together when it's almost pure luck. And it's just based on the average projection. It doesn't say anything about the game. With SaberSim here, instead, even a lineup that has Cooper Kupp captain and Matt Stafford not in the flex position, there's still a game sim that is represented by that lineup, or that lineup is represented by a game sim. So I know some of this is a little bit more manual. I think the less manual approaches to this are doing things like capping your max salary and working more from the lens of exposures. So, I mentioned changing your stack types, right? You can even do this kind of from the standpoint of exposures, right? Maybe you want it to be more heavily on Cooper Kupp captain. Maybe you're intentionally underweight on Stafford, right? You kind of make the builder. If you're building 150 lineups, this might be easier than hand picking. But if you're playing 20 or less, I think you can do a lot of this hand picked. And Max got me on this, actually. We were talking on one of our NFL Showdown streams at the start of the season. He said, especially when he's playing a little bit of a smaller number of lineups for a slate like this, he likes to go through and look for particular combinations of players that are unlikely to be used together, just because of the way that the field's going to think about the game. So, 6 said AJ Green captain with no Murray was the money. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. There are frequently weird combinations of players. It's a single game of football. Virtually anything can happen. So, but people create rules that exclude these combinations of players that have negative correlations on average, or even force positive correlation and remove their ability to, to bink or even just to build lineups that are unique. And I think this is probably more in line with what some of the sharpest players are doing with NFL Showdown, right? Like, projections mean so little here, ultimately, especially average projection. The EV of this particular game type is just overwhelmingly packed into creating lineups that are unique. So, but those are some of my favorite ways that I like to approach it. So I know we've been talking about this question here for a while. So kind of in summary, avoiding duplication in NFL Showdown, a few things that I recommend. I think first of all, make sure you're building on Sim Variance 10. Use your single game simulations. They are and a very valuable tool for you. I think leaving a little ownership fades on can be helpful as well, at least for creating some of those lower owned combinations of players. I know that's the default. I know there are players out here that turn this off and just want optimal game sims. I think that's fine, but keeping a little bit of ownership fade on, I think, can help you get a little bit lower chance of being duplicated. Reduce the max salary, like I mentioned here. In the build itself, try to look for exposures, combinations of players, lineup constructions using the team stacks that are going to be a little bit unique for the contest. And then especially if you have time or are playing less lineups and can afford to do it, cherry pick some lineups with combinations of players that are unlikely to be used. So that's kind of my general summary there. But Six said new, but have grown to love and appreciate the tool you guys have developed. So I appreciate the insight and guidance your team provides. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking questions. It's great questions. Going on to help far more people watching this stream. So, okay, question from Couch here. Let's see. Question says, if there's a player you want to remove from your player pool, would you be better off to set that player at a floor/lower projection versus actually unchecking them from your pool? The context behind the question, which I appreciate. As I understand the builder, when you manually change projections, the builder tries to pull from sims where the outcome is close to what you adjusted to. But when you uncheck that player, I assume the full range of outcomes for the player is still considered. Would it not be advantageous to have only sims where the player doesn't hit value considered for lineups? Okay, so I think maybe there's a point of confusion here. So changing a player projection does not introduce bias into the sims that are ultimately chosen for the lineup, right? So put another way, if we drop the projection for Kyler Murray to 18 points, we are not biased in what sims we actually end up pulling up for this game. We are simply reducing, actually, so it's easier for me to do this math in my head. Let's say we do that. What instead happens is that for every single sim we pull, Kyler Murray's projection will drop 6 points from what his real value was in that game sim. So for example, if we pull a game where the final score is 45-42 and Kyler Murray scored 38 points in that particular game sim, well, now he scores 32 because of your custom projection, and we'll build the lineup around it accordingly. But changing a player's projection does not bias the sims that are available to be chosen when we're building the lineups. I do believe changing the team totals. No, it doesn't. So if you change the team totals, what will happen is we will say, let's say you adjust this to 22. So in this particular case, what happens is we will, in this case, will abridge the game sims, right? We'll look for a different set of game sims where the mean outcome is for the Cardinals is 22 points. Look at what the players in that game score in that set of game sims, and then change the custom projections for players to match that set of game sims accordingly. But when we actually go and build the lineups, you are still building with the full set of sims for that lineup set. It's just that the player projections will change in those individual game sims, like the way I mentioned just before. Does that make sense? But it is an important note to say here that you do not force bias into the process in terms of the sims that are available to be selected when you adjust projections. So, I mean, I do think there is kind of a broader point here of if there's a player you want to remove from your player pool, you're better off reducing the projection. I do think it can be interesting, at least as an experiment, if you know maybe, for example, that you want to be, or you think you want to be underweight on a player, instead taking the approach to drop that player's projection to 10% or 15% or even 20% and see if that player is still showing up in your lineups at all, which might imply that even if that player has a 40th percentile outcome, that they can still be optimal. So yeah, so Couch says, oh, okay, I think adjusting the game totals is where I got that idea that different sims were used by adjusting projections. And I think I answered a question about adjusting team totals maybe yesterday or on Friday. And I think the way I answered that question might have definitely created some confusion there. Because it basically is, I can see how it's a little bit confusing, right? we use the sims. We basically go back to the sims to say, what are the most likely outcomes for players when the Cardinals' average outcome is only 21 points. And then we use that to update the individual player projections, but we don't actually, you are not then building with a more limited set of game simulations than you were before. We're just using a limited set of game simulations to set the averages of players appropriately. So. Six said, so your suggestion is if any adjustments want or need to be made, it's best practice to adjust the game as a whole since it has more influence to the sims versus an individual player. It kind of depends. It depends on what your approach is, right? It depends on why you're doing something. If you told me that you were adjusting Kyler Murray's projection down here to something like this to get leverage on the field and to just be under on a player that you think is going to be overowned, I don't think there's anything wrong with just adjusting individual players. If you were pessimistic or bearish on the Cardinals offense overall, you would probably be better off adjusting the team total so that you had a more holistic change to the projections, right? Kyler Murray's projection coming down also means, strange that he didn't move, but Kyler Murray's projections coming down means that other players in the game, even Matt Stafford's projection comes down when the Cardinals have less of a high average outcome. So I think it depends a lot on what your overall approach is. I mean, also if you have like a sense, I know there are a lot of players out there that just kind of have an intuitive sense of when projections feel a little bit too high or too low. I think you could absolutely be looking at the Cardinals offense on the whole and come to some kind of general conclusion that maybe this projection feels a little bit high and that this projection should be a little bit higher, right? Maybe these two players, these two receivers should actually be a little bit closer in raw projection to one another. That isn't really necessarily like a statement on what you think the outcome of the game is. You just think these projections feel a little bit high. So I think it's more about what your goal is there, or what impact you're trying to have on the builder. So, but a good question there as well. So, man, time is flying on this stream here today. We are already at about 52 minutes. Any other questions for me here today? I think we have managed to get through pretty much everything. We did a quick little demo of entering contests on DraftKings and FanDuel in the most basic way of just downloading lineups and uploading them to the sites. Followed that up with a quick entry editor demo for both DraftKings and FanDuel, just to show how much more easy that was. We talked a little bit about the risks and the value of researching past slates, why looking at what sharp players are doing on both slates they win and lose and trying to come up with maybe more conclusions about that, I think is a better approach than trying to dial in and trying to figure out how to build the optimal on a particular slate. Talked a ton here about avoiding duplication in your NFL Showdown slates. So good show overall here today. It has gone pretty quick. So I don't see any other questions coming in here. I think we'll go ahead and call it a day there for today's stream. We will be back, of course, here tomorrow, Wednesday, for office hours, 2 p.m. Eastern, same time, same place. So if you have questions, as always, email us, support@sabersim.com. Throw them into the office hours channel in Slack. We'll get to them on tomorrow's show. Oh, Jack. Sorry, Jack. Missed your question. Thanks for the reminder. Sometimes I get a little too excited on the question that I'm responding to. Let's hit this one real quick for Jack. Hi, Jordan. If I put in 20 lineups on FanDuel by hand, can I later use SaberSim to late swap? You can. You absolutely can. So what you'll want to do in that particular case is, so let's say you did this for NBA, right? You hand-built 20 lineups. Maybe you hand-built 20 lineups for lock, and now you're just trying to late swap. If you go here to FanDuel, right? All you will really need to do is go to your upcoming tab. So you'll have all your lineups here. In this case, I just have 3, but you'd have 20. Click this CSV edit button. Download the CSV template, download this to your computer, and then go to the entry editor on the site. In this case, I already have an entries file loaded, so it's going to show up with my actual entries. If I didn't, there would be this big button that says upload your entries file. So you would just upload it there. If you do somehow already have an entries file loaded, what you'll want to do to just make sure that you have the right lineups, SaberSim and FanDuel are both synced up, is just click this upload new entries button, click select file, grab the file that you just downloaded, click apply, and it'll say, are you sure you want to overwrite? In this case, yes, I want to overwrite with the lineups that I hand built, and go like this. And then it's going to load, and then you're good to go. And now later in the slate, you can late swap, you can quick swap, etc., and just load those. So yeah, that can be a really valuable tool, especially, you don't always have time when news breaks during an NBA slate in a late swap window to update everything by hand. Even if you did, it's very easy to late swap into worse lineups. You don't necessarily have the projections in front of you. You can't figure out exactly like what's optimal. I think that can be a good strategy if you're a hand builder, or even if you use SaberSim to build your initial lineups and then tweak and mess around with things from there, and then you need to late swap. That can be a very valuable tool to do that way. So yeah. And I apologize again for missing your question here. I realize now it was because I copied and pasted this other question here that ended up bumping it all the way to the top. So let me make sure I didn't miss anything else here before we end up calling it a day on today's show. But I think we pretty much got it here. So Don said, I'm looking for a way to hedge my bets to at least break even and win if lucky, but no losing. Yeah, that's tough. I think there was I don't even know if I want to say this because it's just a bad strategy. There was a strategy that was somewhat popular years ago in DFS that was basically trying to do this, where it was like a ladder contest selection strategy. So you would play a single lineup and you would enter it in 50-50s and triple ups and quintuple ups and small field and large field GPPs. And the idea was if you could cash more often than not in the double ups, it would pay for the rest of the entries for that particular slate. The problem, it sounds okay, right, when you first hear it. The fundamental problem with that is that lineups do not have the same expected value in every contest you play them in. If you were just building a single lineup, if it is good cash lineup, it's very likely it has very little equity in a GPP anyway. It's probably very negative EV in a GPP. All right, we are back. I think wouldn't be an office hours if the internet did not blip for just a second, right? So very, very classic internet blip there. I don't know where I went out, and since I was talking about something that I patently don't want anybody to do, I'm gonna kind of start over there, right? The reason you don't want to play that like ladder strategy overall of playing like a single lineup in a wide variety of different contests is because that lineup does not have win equity in every single one of those contests. If you build a lineup that's built to cash in cash games, it's likely that it's a very bad GPP lineup. And if you build a lineup that's a very good GPP lineup, it probably has no win equity in the cash contests. So what I was saying is that I imagine there are probably still a lot of players out there that are doing this, building one lineup and entering it into every single contest under the sun. It is not a good strategy, but it was the reason the strategy came about was basically to try to do this. What Don's describing here is you have a contest selection system that tries to basically mitigate loss and still have upside. And as Six said, let me know if you find the way. You can let me know too, because I think that is a very difficult challenge to solve. I think the best bet that I have heard at having this approach now is to incorporate some prop betting into your, into your games budget, into your sports betting budget. Prop betting markets are definitely beatable. You can see Ross's NBA prop bet of the day has been going pretty well. I know it got off to a rough start, but that's just bad variance. It's profitable now. I think you can create kind of a lower variance, more reliable stream of income here with prop bets while still having upside by playing like a limited DFS GPP volume. That I think is probably the best approach. Cash games are not, they're just not as beatable as they used to be years ago. I think what people used to do is play cash games. That's where the 80-20 split came from, right? Play 80% cash and basically free roll your GPP entries. And I just don't think that's viable anymore. The ROI that's possible in cash games now is just way lower than it used to be. So Cody said, got it. I should ladder my entries. Yeah, I knew I would regret that. Somebody's gonna watch this video now, and on the second my internet went out, they're gonna be like, oh, all right, I guess the stream ended or something like that, and then go and do this. So please, if you're still watching me, do any lineup you enter in multiple contests should have win equity in that contest. It should be built at least in some way for that contest. So let's see. OS says, do you think Ayton plays today? Gosh, I don't know. I wish I knew. I wish I could tell you. But I don't know. I would say maybe from the standpoint of maybe finding a little bit of an edge. I kind of hope he doesn't, and I kind of hope it comes out after lock, right? Get the opportunity, maybe like 10 minutes before this game starts, get the opportunity to late swap with that news and take advantage of all the people that don't or can't or don't know how to in the contests. But that's kind of my take. I don't know. I don't know. So, but all right, cool. We are right at about the hour mark here. We will go ahead and leave it there. I will be right back here again tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. So let me know if you have questions throughout the slates tonight, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care.